If you've been looking into creative coding, you've probably seen both processing and p5js, and you may have wondered what the difference is between the two. They're both great options if you're looking to bring programming into your creative toolkit. There's slight variations between each one, but if you're familiar with one, it's actually pretty easy to jump from one to the other. I personally like using processing because it's a little bit easier to export images and video out directly, for me at least. And when I teach creative coding, I think that it's a little bit easier to get started in, unless you have a background in JavaScript. First off, I want to provide a little bit of context around p5js and processing. Processing is an open source programming environment based off of Java, and it was created, I believe, around 2001, whereas p5js is a JavaScript library created around 2013. And the benefits of this, like processing, it's also free and open source. It can be used on the web because it's JavaScript. Which I think is a really big benefit if you're trying to do something that's meant to be seen on the internet through a web browser. If you're coding in this environment, you can use the online editor. It's at editor.p5js.org, or you can use your own code editor. And then lastly, there's also with the latest processing IDE, it also supports p5js, so you can actually switch your languages from there and get a pretty seamless experience. There's a few things, to go over, like what are the differences between these two. Here's a little chart, helpfully created with ChatGPT, so just want to cite my sources. Like I said, processing is Java-based, p5js is JavaScript-based. Again, p5js works really well in a web browser. Processing kind of runs directly on your machine. And then the syntax itself is going to be Java for processing and JavaScript in p5js. Some examples of that are like the way that variables are declared. There's just a little bit different language. So processing will use int or string, float. There's a lot of different variables that it can use, whereas the variables in p5js will use different ones, such as let. And just to go over some of these, the differences here in a little bit more depth, variables are defined differently, as I said. Typically, if you see these are JavaScript variables. Var is something that has been used a lot in the past. I think there's a shift to move into using let and const, which I'll go over in a little bit. But var is like a generic kind of variable that's like a catch-all. It can be used for in block or global scope, and it's also accessible as a property. So if you need to be accessing that property through your web browser, this might be the way to go. But let is something you'll probably start to see more often. It's like var. The main distinction between let and const is that let is something that's supposed to change in value. So if you're going to assign it new values, you should use let, not const, because constant has to be constant. Let can also be block or variable scope based on where you place it, but it is not accessible as a property. So that could be one instance where if you need that value, that property, you might want to use var instead. And like I said, const is not going to be changed. It can be block or global scope as well, but again, it's not going to be accessible as a property. Here are just two examples of this in practice. Again, using let in p5js and using int. Just seeing it in a little bit more context. And then as far as usage and stuff, again, one of the benefits for me, like running processing, is that it runs as a desktop application. I don't have to worry about setting up, like an HTML page to run in the browser, or sometimes that can be a few extra steps. Although with the new processing IDE, it's actually a lot easier. So I highly recommend that. And again, for the web, you probably want to be focusing on p5js. In the past, there were ways to port processing sketches, but I think you might as well use p5js if it's meant to be for the web. And they both have different libraries, styles of libraries you can access. p5js has its own libraries, but also if you're writing in JavaScript, you can also use some other JavaScript libraries, which extends the functionality a lot. Inside of processing, you're probably gonna see the way that functions are called. They're gonna have a different syntax as well. So again, this has to do with differences between Java and JavaScript. So in processing, you'll see void a lot, and really that's declaring a function. The void itself is actually means like it specifies the return type. for that function. So that means it's not returning anything. But you'll also see other types of functions being written. There's some that return floats or ints or different values. Those will also use function. So you can see an example of that below. So for the setup, that's like the first thing you'll notice the difference. It'll be void setup and processing and function setup in p5js. Also in this example, you can see the way that size is declared is different, size versus create canvas. Here's some other syntax differences. I just talked about the size versus create canvas. We talked about the variables themselves. So again, you're going to see let, const, or var in p5js. The way that classes are written is also going to be different. Events are also handled differently because JavaScript has different event handling. And then as far as the structure goes, it's usually that single processing file. You could have other, if you have a class or other things, they could be referenced there. But with p5js, if you really are going to deploy this, you're going to have your JavaScript file that has that p5js code in it, and also an HTML file with links to the source for the JavaScript and also the p5js functionality. So when I think about teaching with p5js, setting up an HTML file and the JavaScript file has been a hurdle in the past. Hopefully, it's something now with the new processing IDE or other workarounds. Once you set up the file, it's pretty easy to keep using it. And as far as the environment goes, I've kind of talked about this. There's a web editor for p5js. You can use any code editor, right? Such as VS Code. And again, this chart is really meant to show, that typically if you're going to work on the web, you're building a website, you have an HTML page, that's a good time to be using p5js. This is just an example of how to set up your p5js if you're using HTML, use the inside the script tag. You'll provide a link to the processing CDN. This is going to allow that to bring in that functionality from p5js. This is probably an older link, but there's just try to get the latest version, and then you'll write your p5js code in between script tags. Below that, because the code is going to be read from top to bottom, or you could have a separate JavaScript file that contains all this code, and you can just link to that. This is an example of working inside the editor, the online editor. It's at editor.p5js.org, and you can write the code here, and as you add elements or as you change things, you should see the update here. So this is where you write your code, and on this side you can see the preview. And then the other thing I was mentioning was this is the new processing IDE, and if you want to change the style that you're writing in, you can go up to here in the right corner and change it to, let's say, p5js. And when you do that, it will give you the setup and the draw functions already, and you can write your code in here. And it also provides a HTML file. When you save this out, you're going to see that it saves that index.html file and the p5js, the JavaScript file, and it links them all together. So this is, and if you use any libraries, right now it's the current library, but if you use any other ones, if you import them, I think they should be stored in here as well. So really running this code right here on a web browser will essentially run the sketch. But what's nice is that you can preview this all in here. So if we grabbed this code, let's say create a canvas 400. Okay, so you're seeing that it's running it in the browser, and it's giving you that preview. So that, I think, is pretty helpful if you're trying to run p5js. One reason that I'm making this video is I've noticed that there has been a big shift to p5js from processing. It all makes sense. The web is just becoming much more prevalent, and web applications, I think, are becoming more of the standard. I use something in my classes called open processing to allow students to upload their code. For example, this is one of the first projects we do. And the issue with this, however, is now that you can see processing here on this site is actually it's been deprecated. I mean, it makes sense because we're on a web browser, we're on a website. So probably instead of trying to port this over using p5js, just makes sense here. So there's an announcement here from Open Processing, and they're no longer fully supporting processing. So even though you can still upload processing files, I've noticed in some of my classes that there have been times where the code didn't quite work, and especially if there are any new functions, they're not going to be supported in here. So yeah, as you can see, yeah, it's no longer being supported, and there's some more explanation to talk about some of the things to port your sketches, and I think this might be something that I'm going to have to move towards. But I did want to show how to upload processing files on sketches onto Open Processing. So, for example, probably the best thing to do is whenever you write your sketch, you want to make sure that you're in the Pjs mode, which is actually the processing. p5js is actually p5js JavaScript. And here you can see that in this example, we're using void, we're using size. So you can tell that this is written in processing. If you're going to start this, so you want to create your sketch. By default, it's going to create a p5js sketch. You'll switch to pjs. And I'm going to take that code from here and just show what happens. There's probably going to be some workarounds here. So if you just paste this in and you try to run it, actually, that seems to work just by doing that. One thing I did notice, though, is sometimes, this is good. The mode automatically gets changed. So the mode here is going to be limited based off of which mode supports processing. So that's really all you have to do. And then you can copy and paste your code from your processing file, your sketch, into here, and by pressing play, it should run. Again, there are some bugs in this, so I always tell my students if the code works in processing, that's probably fine. It probably is maybe it's using a newer function or something that isn't supported by Open Processing. So in closing, the choice between using processing or p5js is really up to you. I think it depends on the context, what you're going to be using it for. If it's meant to be on the web, I would use p5js. If it's something that you can run on your computer, that you're using to kind of quickly iterate and export assets out of, I think processing would be a good option. But I've seen people come up with really good solutions for exporting from p5js at high quality. So because JavaScript is used for websites, p5js and JavaScript in general are continually being updated. I think the functionality will continue to improve and maybe result in a bigger advantage for p5js.